Welcome to your Wednesday edition of Fantasy Football Today. What's up, everyone? I'm Adam Azer with Jamie Eisenberg and Dan Schneier. Dan, 2 more episodes for you this week, and I know you're already practicing for Fantasy Jeopardy on Friday.
I got a lot on the line. Last time I got on Fantasy Jeopardy, it was embarrassing, to say the least. Of course, Adam puts me against Heath again. You can't put me against somebody else. You can't bring on like a Marone or something to get in here and give me someone I can beat. Did I pronounce it right that time, Jamie?
Why do you think you would beat Marone?
No, I definitely wouldn't beat Marone. Marone's sharper than anyone here. I need someone else than Marone. I want to throw anyone to the bus, though.
All right, well, that's coming up on Friday. Tomorrow, we'll talk about 13 through 24 in our PPR rankings. Today, looking at the consensus top 12 in PPR, which I think will be more or less a consensus top 6 in some order. And then, 7 through 12 will be a lot of the same names, but I think a little bit more difficult to figure out. I'll ask you a few questions about the top 12, and then we'll get into it player by player. We have a few news items to get to, including, obviously, the Tyreek Hill news. First, though, oh, my gosh, I don't know. Been doing this since 2009 with you guys. Well, with Jamie, Dan, much more recent than that. But is this the coolest thing that I'm going to be able to say? The biggest announcement I've ever made. Amazing. We were giving away that spot in the Dynasty League on St. Jude as part of our draft-a-thon. And I was like, I think maybe we could get anywhere from a few $100 to maybe $3,000-$4,000. I thought maybe someone would go. $21,400. I don't know if I'm allowed to give out the name yet. I will as soon as, it's cool with him. Say who bid on it, but $21,400 raised for St. Jude for a spot in our Startup Dynasty League. Blown away. Dan, this is just the beginning of what's going to be an incredible drive, raising so much money for St. Jude.
Yeah, this was incredible. It blew me away as well. Thank you to, we're not going to announce the name, but thank you to whoever it was who made this bid. 58 bids I see. That's just awesome to see too. There was a ton of action. I really did think that if we got to a few thousand, it would be an incredible win. And to get this high, it just shows how great the community is, how willing people are to help donate to this cause. And as everyone knows who has followed us with Draft-a-thon, this is only the start. We're going to go all the way through August. There's going to be a lot of fun events coming up that you can participate in. There's going to be other bids you can, get yourself involved in. They're going to be cheaper than this. You're not going to have to spend $20,000. Anything you'd want to do to help donate to St. Jude, we love you for, and we're excited for as well. This is just a great way to start this, though. I mean, last year, I don't think we had anything nearly as exciting until maybe July, late July, August. So to get this going early June, mid-June, it's awesome.
And thank you very much for all of you who bid. And there will be other opportunities to get in leagues with us. All right.
Amazing.
Yeah. I don't know, Jamie, did you want to say anything? I didn't want to cut you off there.
No, I mean, again, I think it will be exciting when we do reveal who actually did it. But, that person has reached out to you and to me, and, thanking them privately, I don't think just does it justice for the donation and the cause and the kind words that were said as well, so just truly appreciative, to that individual, to some other individuals, we've referenced them over the years that continue to donate. And it's just amazing. We do this as our jobs. It's obviously a fun part of our job, everything really about our job is fun, but this is for such a worthwhile cause, and to see people rally around it with whatever small amount they could donate, or in this case, a significant amount. It's just fascinating. It just blows me away. I was moved to tears today when I got the note about the person who made the donation, just because of the things that they said, but just the ability to do what they did.
And it wasn't just him. All the other people who donated, made that go up to $21,400 in a week, by the way. Incredible. All right, let's get to today's topic here, our top 12. First question for you. Quick questions here. Jamie, Why isn't Cooper Kupp number 1 overall? He's been by far the best per game 2 years in a row. Now, you have to Azer stat it a little bit, because I'm going to throw out the game he didn't play with Stafford this year. But if you do count only the Stafford games, the 8 games he played with Stafford, he was like 3.5 points better than Justin Jefferson in PPR. And it would have been 2 straight years averaging at least 25 points per game, which is incredible in PPR. Why isn't Cooper Kupp number 1 overall?
I think just age, for me, is the biggest concern. And the fact that he's 30, the fact that Stafford considered retirement and couldn't finish the season last year. So he's going to be open when he's on the field. He's always open. It's the most amazing thing to ever watch him play. It's like the ball's going to him. I don't think Van Jefferson and I'm going to butcher the other guy's name, Puka,
Nakua.
Is going to threaten his targets. Tyler Higbee's not going to threaten his targets. Not going to turn into a running team. But the fact that he couldn't finish the season last year, and the fact that Stafford couldn't finish the season last year, you have to be a little bit concerned because he is hitting that point. We've talked about this. Receivers when they turn 30, they start to hit that cliff, and hopefully that's not the case for him.
You want to get in there, Dan? Where would you take Cooper Kupp? Where is he for you?
He's wide receiver 4 for me, but I teeter back and forth to 3 and 4. I think Jamie brings up the number 1 red flag, but I even feel like the second thing he mentioned is even bigger scare for me. It's Matthew Stafford and his health and just where they're at as a team. If he has an issue with an injury next year, this coming season, I mean, what are the chances that they're going to keep him playing through that toward the end of the season if they fall out of the race and they're trending toward that number 1 overall pick, which some people think is possible? I don't know if it's possible if Stafford's healthy. That's really the big question mark for me, because if he loses Stafford, he loses that rapport that he had with him, Kupp, and obviously the production will go down. The age is also a factor, but it's not only that. I mean, his competition for the 1 and 2 spots, and for me, the 3rd spot where I have Tyreek Hill, his competition for 1 and 2, Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase, also have a lot of accolades to their name, which we're about to go over, and reasons to believe that they should be, that they're not too far behind, even on the per game basis, even if you Azer stat it. But the other side of it is definitely you can Azer stat this. He had 5 top 10 wide receiver finishes in just 9 games last year in PPR. And he was still 3rd in target share, 4th in target per route run rate, which is a rate stat, advanced stat that that Jacob Gibbs brings up a lot that I kind of follow him on. I think it's very predictable. And the air yards were there as well last year. I think he was top 12 in that. So he has the profile you like, but I think he has 2 players who are competing with him who have a good case for wide receiver 1 as well.
All right. Second question here. Does Christian McCaffrey have the most carry competition? Okay, not as catches. Does he have the most competition for carries of any of the first-round running backs? There are 5 of them: McCaffrey, Eckler, Bijan Robinson, Jonathan Taylor, and Saquon Barkley. Jamie, does Christian McCaffrey have the most competition for carries among all 5 first-round running backs?
I would anticipate that being the case. It's just a matter of there's so many carries available in Atlanta. If they're going to replicate the offense where they were number 1 in carries at 559, then I think Tyler Algier or Cordarrelle Patterson, the combination of the 2, will take maybe enough away. If you want to split up the percentages, may come out in favor of Atlanta or in disfavor of Atlanta, for Bijan by comparison. But yes, I mean, if Elijah Mitchell is healthy, it's concerning. There was significant, 67 to 62 over the 6 games that they played together, including the playoffs. That was the carry differential for McCaffrey with a 5 carry edge. So yes, you got to be a little bit concerned about McCaffrey. It makes me a little skittish with him, just knowing that there is the potential of, especially when we get to the end of the season, if everybody's healthy and they're trending in the direction that they should be, heading to the playoffs, do they start to pull back on McCaffrey's workload a little bit, which is fancy playoff time, to make sure he's healthy for that NFL playoff run?
Yeah, 67 to 62. We will always bring that up. Also, that was, as Jamie just said, the amount of carries that McCaffrey had compared to Mitchell in the 6 games they played together, including the playoffs. But the difference between McCaffrey in those 6 games with Mitchell, he averaged 16.7 PPR fantasy points per game. Without him, 5 regular season games that he played without Elijah Mitchell, he averaged 25.8. So that's 9 points per game difference. I'm not saying that's going to happen again. I don't think the split will be nearly as even. I don't think anybody does, but it is, something we'll be talking about a lot. Last question. I think Dan's going to say no. Well, maybe he's going to say yes, but it wouldn't be the case for him, because I was surprised you said you had Cooper Kupp at wide receiver 4. I feel like the top 6 are going to be, in some order, Jefferson, Chase, Kupp, McCaffrey, Eckler, Kelce. Okay. You feel like that's going to be the consensus industry top 6 in some order? The top 3 wide receivers: McCaffrey, Eckler, and Kelce?
Yeah, I think it's going to be that way. I mean, my rankings are slightly different. I have Tyreek Hill over Cooper Kupp, and I see more of a ceiling play there, and I see less of a chance of dropping off in production there. So, but I think consensus will probably have Kupp in that mix and not Hill.
All right. We have a lot of other podcasts that you can listen to or watch on YouTube. You can always watch us on YouTube at youtube.com/fantasyfootball today. But other podcasts, we've got soccer podcasts. We've got Combat Sports, Morning Combat, great show. We've got Pick Six for NFL. We've got college football. Catch up on all your recruiting news. I mean, we've got so much. Go to cbssports.com/podcasts and check it all out. Let's go to our news and notes. Jamie, what do you think? What do you make of this Tyreek Hill situation? Police investigating assault and battery allegations involving Tyreek Hill. We're going to talk about him as I think number 7 in the consensus rankings right now. What do you think?
I mean, obviously, you got to wait to see how the investigation plays out. So everything is, alleged at this point. So, you don't want to jump to conclusions. And we know that the legal process has to, clearly be involved here until the NFL makes a determination. Because as we've seen with the Alvin Kamara case, that's still going on from the Pro Bowl following the 2021 season. This could linger for a while. So I don't know how much this is going to impact Tyreek Hill's 2023 season. But again, this is a player that does have some history, of off-field incidents that could come back, in terms of the moral code or whatever the NFL calls it, that where Roger Goodell can maybe step in here. Hopefully, this is, something that won't keep him from playing. Again, you don't want to jump to conclusions. I actually had to do a magazine write-up about Tyreek Hill because for another publication, because we have to comment on our picks. He was my first pick at 9th overall, and I almost didn't I didn't know what to say. It's such a hard thing to give advice on because we're not drafting right now, which is fantasy is always secondary in situations like this. But in any event, I think if he plays, as long as there's nothing pending prior to the start of the season, I think you're still drafting him as a first round pick. We get further news on it that will sort of change things.
How about this 17 game pace for Tyreek Hill when Tua Tagovailoa was healthy? Not the games he missed, not the games he left early with an injury, just the games he played fully. 17 game pace for Tyreek Hill was 119 catches, 1,768 yards, and 10 touchdowns on 173 targets. So that's really not that much worse than Justin Jefferson. It's more touchdowns, it's 40 fewer yards, and it's 9 fewer catches. That was with a healthy Tua. More news.
I don't think we talk about enough the amazing scenario that he left Patrick Mahomes and in a lot of ways was better.
Yeah.
And Patrick Mahomes loses him and in a lot of ways was better. It's just it's so fascinating based on his talent and their talent and just how they've been able to, okay, we've managed and he's managed. And it's kudos to both of the abilities of the players and what they're able to do on the field.
The Rams signed Sony Michel, who just in 2021, just 2 seasons ago, he had a 6-game stretch where he averaged more than 20 carries per game. He had 129 carries in 6 games, 540 yards, 3 touchdowns. I don't know. Does Sony Michel matter to anyone?
No, but we did just hear recently Sean McVay say Cam Akers is going to be a big part of this offense. So that kind of gives it a little bit of a scare, but I feel like more so this is just a depth-based signing. The Rams don't really have much behind Cam Akers, so, throw him in the mix, but maybe have it temper your expectations a bit for Akers.
I think it's more just, Zach Evans, if you're hoping he might become something.
Mon-Fri St. Brown wants to be used downfield more this season. That would be something because he had a really, really low ADOT. So if he is used downfield, maybe more yards, but fewer catches. He had 2 fewer catches than Stefon Diggs, but 268 fewer yards. Mon-Fri St. Brown had 18 more catches than A.J. Brown, but 335 fewer yards. And here's a Giants note for Dan Schneier. Wan'Dale Robinson, according to the New York Post, might be a candidate to start the season on the PUP list. He is not as far along in his recovery as Sterling Shepard is. And Paris Campbell is the talk of the town. Has he entered a draft discussion for you, Paris Campbell?
Yeah, I think he should. He had a great set of OTAs, a great mini camp. He's working as the slot. He was the favorite target besides Waller. I mean, at this stage, the last we heard with Wan'Dale Robinson before this was that he was progressing well in his recovery and things should be okay and he should be fine. Now it's PUP list potentially for the start of the season. That's the first 6 games of the year. We'll see if that plays true. But if he's out of the mix, all his competition for the slot will be, then Paris Campbell's competition for the slot will only be Sterling Shepard. And Sterling Shepard hasn't been able to stay on the field. So for really any of his last few seasons. So I think Campbell definitely belongs in the mix. We saw what that role was for Richie James last year, and Campbell's definitely an upgrade over Richie James.
Where do you see Jalen Hyatt lining up?
on the
right
bench
now with the third team. He's working mostly with the third and second team. I think he'll be working the mix eventually, but I think it will probably have to be the slot in year one. He didn't really do much. He didn't really show much wide receiver on the outside at Tennessee. He didn't really show much in general against press man coverage. So I don't know if the Giants can trust him there yet.
All right. That's enough Giants talk for today, except Saquon Barkley is in our top 12. So we'll talk about him a little bit later. We'll take a quick break here. Top 12 in PPR when we come back. Okay, the top 12 players in point per reception scoring. When was the last time I actually said what PPR stands for? I think we probably know. So if you go to our rankings page, cbssports.com/fantasy/football/rankings, or just go to cbssports.com/fantasy and you can click a couple links and get to the rankings. We now have the consensus rankings on the left. And then we have Jamie's, and then we have Dave's, and then we have Heath's. Dan and I are not cool enough to be on this page. So the consensus rankings are Jefferson, Chase, McCaffrey, Kelce, Eckler, Kupp. So that is that top 6 I was talking about. If the first 6 are Jefferson, Chase, McCaffrey, Kelce, Eckler, Kupp. And Jamie, you have almost that exact top 6, except you have Bijan Robinson ahead of Cooper Kupp. But Jefferson, Chase, McCaffrey, Kelce, Eckler, Kupp. First question, what do you think about the first 2 picks being wide receivers? I feel like that's probably pretty unusual.
Yeah, I would say so. Usually you see last year Jonathan Taylor, last couple of seasons Christian McCaffrey, as well as last year in the mixed. I just think they're the safest players with just as much upside as anybody. We've seen what Jefferson has been. We know what Chase has been on a per game basis last year, and even the early part of his career. They're tied to strong systems and quarterbacks that will certainly get them the ball enough and make them successful enough. Jefferson benefited with the addition of Kevin O'Connell. You saw what Joe Burrow has become to help Jamar Chase. And so I think when you're talking about what their abilities are, where they are in their careers in terms of age, which gives them the edge over Kupp. To me, it's a no-brainer. Heath is probably a better person to ask why he has Chase over Jefferson. I know we've talked about that quite a bit. He goes back to his points per game and the potential of what Jordan Addison could become to maybe detract from some of what Justin Jefferson does. But to me, Jefferson's the easy number 1 choice, and Jamar Chase the easy number 2.
What do you think about that, Dan? Because Eckler's been a stud 2 years in a row, and he averaged more points per game than both of them, I believe. He did. He averaged 22.3 points per game, and Justin Jefferson averaged 21.5 points per game. Kupp, like I said, was better than that. Kupp was at 22.6 points per game, but again, with Stafford, it was closer to 25 points per game. Yeah, I mean, is that it? Is it just age? Because these running backs are getting older. We were saying the same thing about Eckler last year, and he was amazing.
He's now reaching a different stage of that age bracket, though. I think he's going to be 27 this year. 28 this year. Sorry, it's going into 27 last year. So higher chance. I also feel like there's a possibility that offense takes totally different shape this year and is better in the red zone through the air with Kellen Moore calling the plays and Quentin Johnson now in the mix. So I think you could see a change there. For me, those factors are enough to boost the other 2 players. I do have Jefferson and Chase 1. I mean, some of these stats for these 2 players, Jefferson and Chase, really stand out to me. Jefferson has more PPR points in his first 3 years as an NFL player than any wide receiver in history. And he did that despite only having the 25th most touchdowns over that period. So if there is any possibility for some touchdown regression here with Jefferson, I mean, we're talking about someone who's going to set the record at some point for fantasy. I mean, he had 4 finishes wide receiver 1 last year, 2 as the wide receiver 2 overall. Again, not with a lot of touchdowns last year. There are some issues I have with Jefferson. The only thing is 4 games with 6 targets or fewer in all those games, including one I watched against the Giants. He actually had 7 in that one. The one I watched against the Giants, they just used bracket coverage against him the whole time. But that may not be possible this year. If Jordan Addison plays as well as some people expect him to, that's going to change how defenses can defend Jefferson. So that's another tip in his cap. Then for Chase, the case for Chase, I mean, over Jefferson would just be the red zone role. I think he had 28 red zone targets last year. That was the most in the NFL. 22 touchdowns over his first 2 seasons. That was the most by any receiver in his first 2 years since Beckham, who was amazing during those years. And out of those 28 red zone targets last year, actually over the past 2 years, 27 targets in the end zone alone. So if you look at Chase and say, well, no one can really match up against him man coverage one-on-one. Teams have tried to, so they've abandoned that, or they've tried to shift coverage over there, but they've abandoned that because then it leaves T. Higgins open. There's a good chance that he's going to be able to kind of repeat what he's been doing as far as touchdowns this season. So he also had 5 top 5 wide receiver finishes I just looked at. And so if you get a bigger role in the red zone here, that for me is the case over Jefferson, I would say. Just the possibility of more touchdowns and the possibility of there's no real way to defend him versus, we have T. Higgins as a realized great receiver. Jordan Addison, more of a projection, especially in year 1. But both of those guys I would have over any running back.
All right, I'm just going to go ahead and say it. Sorry in advance. I know I'm ruining the number 1 pick for everyone, but Justin Jefferson is bust proof. I mean, I really cannot, I just cannot think of what could go wrong other than injury. Chase, on the other hand, do you feel that way? Because I think if you take a guy 2nd overall and he performs like a 2nd rounder, let's say, like wide receiver 5 or 6, I would consider that a bust. I know a lot of people would take issue with that and be like, "You're only a bust."
But how would he finish that far down?
Well,
what would be the case?
Well, he was wide receiver 4 per game in non-PPR, number 3 per game in full PPR. Higgins is the case. I think when you look at, I've said this before, when you look at the very best receivers in fantasy, especially particularly the ones that finish number 1, they are usually total target hogs, clearly better than every other receiver on their team. They usually don't have a T. Higgins on their team. So that would be something that holds down his ceiling a little bit. And I think you look at Jamar Chase's, I don't really care about this. I love Chase, but his 17-game pace was 1,482 yards. Justin Jefferson was over 1,800 yards.
Right.
Like, it wasn't even close. So I don't know. Jamie, how do you feel about
different players? Go ahead, Jamie.
Well, yeah. Go ahead, Jamie. Yeah.
I mean, in terms of Jefferson being bust proof, I think, if you're drafting a number 1, you're thinking that's as close to possible as any player, because why else would you do that knowing the talent? But we saw what happened to Kupp last year when Stafford got hurt. What would happen to Jefferson if Kirk Cousins goes down? Is there enough trust in the quarterback situation there in Minnesota to say that he's still going to be that type of player? I know we kind of crap on Kirk Cousins a lot throughout his career, but he's still been very good for a lot of his fantasy receivers. From Stefon Diggs to Adam Thielen to now Jefferson. So there's one scenario, and then the other one would be is why I think Heath is a little bit concerned is Jordan Addison really that good? To where he's going to take away some semblance of production to the point where it's that much better than what Adam Thielen was doing. So I think there's 2 scenarios there that can maybe knock him down a few pegs aside from him getting hurt. So I don't think you ever want to put that necessarily that moniker on somebody that he's
I know it's scary. I get it. Like, anybody's quarterback could get hurt. I mean, if you look at what Tyreek Hill did with Skylar Thompson last year, he was absolutely terrible. He was really good with Teddy Bridgewater, but anyone's quarterback could get hurt. Any player could get hurt. But if there are no injuries, Jefferson feels super safe. Chase is great. No argument there. So then you get to, all right, so who's number 3? And by the way, I'm certainly not saying that these need to be the 1 and 2 for you guys or for anybody listening or watching right now. But that is what the consensus rankings are. I think you're going to see that a lot. Jefferson and then Chase. And then McCaffrey 3. And then Kelce 4 and Eckler 5 and Kupp 6. Kupp's 30. Eckler's 28. Kelce's going to be 34? McCaffrey, we've already talked about some of the downside with him.
He's also 27.
Yeah. And, there's just some uncertainty, I guess, with his role. But all right, look, I'm just trying to spice this show up. I guess I'll just throw it out another hot take. I don't think he's my RB1 anymore. I think I'm Eckler. I think I'm on Eckler.
I don't hate that.
I mean, look, I get it. He was amazing, and Dan alluded to this. The offense is going to change a little bit, but we saw in a Kellen Moore offense 12 rushing touchdowns from Zeke. I don't remember exactly how many Pollard scored. We know that Eckler's been 28 touchdowns over the last 2 seasons, 20 rushing touchdowns over the last 2 seasons. He's clearly proven to be, if you want to consider McCaffrey the best pass catching back, he's 1A, in terms of what Eckler's able to do. If you don't, and some people may think Eckler's better at this point. So in an up-tempo offense that's going to be with a, quarterback that's definitely, I think, going to bounce back and still on the rise in Justin Herbert, there's a lot to love about Austin Eckler, and still now motivated because he didn't get exactly the contract that he wants. Plus, he's entering a free agent year, so that $1.75 million in incentives, that little carrot that's dangling out there could lead to something bigger if a team wants to, prioritize paying him in 2024. So there's a lot to love about Eckler. There's no reason to, necessarily dispute that tremendously. And then look, if you want to even take it a step further, you take the shiny new toy and Bijan Robinson. It's something that I've considered, especially after, you've been talking about this a lot. And, I wrote about Elijah Mitchell as a sleeper. When you dive into the numbers, like you said, what he's done to McCaffrey and the potential of what San Francisco's offense is. In Carolina, they needed McCaffrey to be Superman. San Francisco does not need that. They can win games in so many different ways, defensively, running the ball with somebody else besides McCaffrey. Their passing game obviously is very successful. So he doesn't necessarily have to be that guy for 17 games, that they can go a different direction, especially if he's a little bit banged up at some point. So, you don't have to necessarily buy into McCaffrey as the number one guy. And that being said, Mitchell missed a lot of time last year. He's been banged up throughout his career. And what McCaffrey did without Mitchell and what McCaffrey's been, especially behind that offensive line, it's pretty enticing to say what he can still give you. So for me, he's still third, but I wouldn't argue somebody taking Eckler or even Bijan ahead of him.
Let me ask you this. If Trey Lance were the quarterback, where would you rank Christian McCaffrey?
Same spot.
Okay. And I just want to say, 67 carries for McCaffrey, 62 for Mitchell in the 6 games they played together, including the playoffs. There were a lot of blowouts. There were maybe 4 blowouts in that stretch. So I really don't think I saw a lot of garbage time for Elijah Mitchell. I talked about this on Twitter. I talked about this on our previous podcast. But there was Jordan Mason was the garbage time guy. However, in the first half of those games, just quarters 1 and 2 of those 6 games, McCaffrey had 37 carries and Mitchell had 17 carries. That was a much bigger split. Still, I don't think you're going to see that kind of split with Eckler and whoever's behind him, or Barkley or Taylor. Am I missing someone? Bijan, we don't know. Okay. Anyway, Kelce. Let's talk about Kelce before we take a break, and then we'll look at the bottom 6 in 7 through 12 in the consensus here. Jamie, how did you determine Kelce as number 4?
You just see what he's been able to accomplish. I know the age is something you got to take into account, and he did have some lulls in the regular season last year, especially in the early middle part of the season until, they kicked into their playoff run. And then he started to look like, Superman again. Clearly teams are going to, focus as much as they can on taking him away. Like Cooper Kupp, you just marvel at how often he's able to get open, how often they scheme him, to get open. He's just such a difference maker at the thinnest position. So, the hard part when you draft Travis Kelce, and I think, Dan, you alluded to this on a recent show, is it doesn't feel good when you look at your team after the draft. Minute draft's over, you're like, oh, God. It's like I lost this running back, or I lost this wide receiver, or my quarterback stinks. But then once you get into the season and you're, 5-point advantage, 10-point advantage, whatever the difference is on your opposing tight end, and knowing what this guy is, and just the fact that you don't have to chase the position. You see people, picking up Chigo Okonkwo here, or David Njoku there, or even, a step further, Jawan Johnson and Tyler Higbee, and, chasing Greg Dulcich and all those guys. It just makes you so confident and I happy that you have, this monster on your team. And so I think it's, again, you got to be bold enough to, pull the trigger that early in the first round. But when you look at the end of the season, I know for me, the last several years, I'm sure many people, you're probably always in the playoffs with Travis Kelce, and you build a smart team, and you have the ability to win a championship because he's that good.
You're a big Kelce guy, Dan. When's the earliest that it's justifiable to take Travis Kelce? And if you would let me, if you indulge here, I want to tell you where he's finished in PPR at running back. If he had been a running back over the last 6 seasons, he would have finished 11th, 9th, 13th, 6th, 10th, and 5th
at running back
per game. So that's top 6 per game in 2 of the last 3 seasons. The other 4 seasons he's been.
Do you mean at wide receiver, Adam?
No, I'm going to do wide receiver as well.
Oh, wow.
At wide receiver per game, he would have been 10th, 9th, 3rd, 11th, and 7th. So his best 2 seasons have been 2 of his 3 most recent seasons, and he's been like wide receiver 3, wide receiver 7, RB6, RB5. That's what you're getting from Kelce. When's the earliest you could justify taking him, Dan?
I think the earliest you can justify taking him is honestly 3rd overall. I wouldn't. I'd probably take him 5th overall, but I think it's justifiable. You just broke down how he finished against running backs and wide receivers. It's one of like the 12 best players in the NFL. I'm sorry, in fantasy football. That doesn't even like take into account the weekly advantage you get from him at tight end, because you don't have to play him at wide receiver or running back. You're playing him at tight end, as Jamie said, as people chase the Greg Dulcich 2-touchdown week, and then he puts together 3 points for you the next week. You're racking up points week after week. He hasn't had under 1,000 yards in 7 years. He's averaged 8 touchdowns or more in the last 7 years. He hasn't missed a game except for COVID in 9 years. I know he's older now at 34, but am I really as concerned about him from an injury risk profile versus like a 27-year-old Saquon Barkley who's at a torn ACL, and all those are like Odell Beckham? Like, there are bigger injury risks in my opinion, despite these players being younger. And last year, everyone talks about how big of an edge he had over the tight end too, Adam. I think he scored 5.3 points more than the tight end too.
Hawkinson, yeah.
That's worth something. But how about how much he scores over the tight end 12 or the tight end 11 or the tight end 10 or all these other guys who you're cycling in, week out, when you don't have Travis Kelce on your roster and you don't have a Hawkinson or whoever else? That's the advantage right there. As I always say, like in fantasy, fantasy to me is a matchups game. Part of my strategy is to either get Kelce and try to win the weekly advantage at tight end, or win the flex. Like in PPR, full PPR leagues, I'm trying to get my flex drafted often before my RB2, sometimes before my RB1, because it's worth the same. But when you have an advantage like Kelce, it gives you such an edge on a weekly basis. So I think you can draft him as soon as 3 overall in a PPR league, but I probably wouldn't take him till 5th.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It was actually Kittle who was PPR tight end 2 per game, not Hawkinson. Okay, let's take a break. When we come back, we'll talk about 7 through 12 in the consensus rankings. So far, we've got Jefferson, Chase, McCaffrey, Kelce, Eckler, and Cooper Kupp. And we will talk about Tyreek Hill and the rest of them when we come back on Fantasy Football Today. All right, welcome back. 7 through 12 in our PPR consensus rankings right now. And number 7 is Tyreek Hill. Number 8 is Bijan Robinson. So actually, after Tyreek Hill, you get 3 straight running backs: Bijan, Barkley, Taylor, Stefon Diggs 11, and CeeDee Lamb 12. So no Pollard, no Jacobs, no Devontae Adams, no Derrick Henry, AJ Brown, Amon-Ra St. Brown. Those are all going to be on tomorrow's show. Again, 7 through 12 in the PPR consensus rankings are Tyreek Hill, Bijan Robinson, Saquon Barkley, Jonathan Taylor, Stefon Diggs, and CeeDee Lamb. Jamie, this is pretty close to what you have. You have Pollard in there. You have Lamb 13th, so just outside. But anything you want to, what jumps out at you when you look at 7 through 12?
I think one of the toughest decisions people are going to have if you're going to go running back is Taylor versus Barkley at this point. And let's assume that Barkley's contract situation is settled early in camp, if not, the start of camp, but, by week 1, because a lot of drafts happen clearly before the first game of the season. Then you're looking at, okay, what does Barkley give you now? 2 years in Brian Daboll's system, 3 years removed from the ACL tear. Is he still going to be this elite level prospect? I think we all hope that's going to be the case, versus what Taylor was prior to last year, what he could be with Anthony Richardson in this new offense and that potential upside. So I struggle with those two. I'm sure a lot of people do as well. For me, I think I'm going to lean a little bit towards, youth here with Taylor because he's a little bit younger. I think the fact that he will have the benefit of a running quarterback, even more so than what Daniel Jones is. I think we could all agree on that Anthony Richardson's a better runner than Daniel Jones. I think that will help open some rushing lanes, and I think he's going to be a bigger factor in the passing game, to be honest with you, just based on, what this team looks like, and I think giving Anthony Richardson some easy opportunities. The design plays will have to be what carries him, because I think when the play breaks down, he's not going to look to throw, he's going to look to run. But I do think that Taylor may see a spike in receptions, especially with the guys that are behind him that aren't exactly very inspiring right now. So I like Taylor slightly ahead of Barkley, but that could change once Barkley's contract situation is resolved, and I feel a little bit better about Barkley once we get closer to the season.
Schneier?
Did you say Schneier or okay?
That's what I said. I said Schneier.
Yeah, I'm a little. I didn't know if you said okay or Schneier.
He said flush. He said flush.
Yeah, I'm probably in the same boat as Jamie here. My biggest concern right now, though, with Jonathan Taylor is, do we definitely get that receiving volume that we saw start to uptick in his career starting 2 seasons ago and really carrying over a little bit toward last year with Anthony Richardson, or are some of those plays undesigned runs, scrambles, as you would call them? Because a lot of what made Barkley so successful last year was when the Giants did operate out of the shotgun or in any passing forward way, Barkley was one of the kind of safety reads, right? He'll run a lot of flare routes out to the flat. And if you don't like what you see, Jones, just throw the ball out there. Is that going to be the case with Taylor in this offense? It wasn't necessarily the case with Shane Steichen in Philadelphia when he ran that offense last year. There wasn't a lot of those flare routes and those outlet passes for the running backs. So that concerns me. And the second concern for Taylor, and the reason I probably have slight edge for Barkley right now, would just be the direction of the Colts offensive line. I just don't like the direction it's heading in. They didn't make a major investment in it this year that I thought would make me feel better about it. And that concerns me a little bit too. Taylor does have age on his side. They're both explosive. They actually had very similar combine testing. They're similar athletes, I would say. At least Barkley, from what Barkley showed last year, hopefully he can keep that up. But the passing game role concerns me a little bit, like I said, and then the offensive line is also a big issue for me.
Okay, I have some polls up here on YouTube and on Twitter. On YouTube right now, we only have 13 votes, just came up, but Barkley 54%, Taylor 46%. On Twitter, 50-50 on 14 votes. So again, we're brand new here. That will be a tough call. And, so I already told you, Tyreek Hill is ahead of them in the consensus rankings. You guys agree with taking Tyreek ahead of Barkley and Taylor?
Yeah, I have him as my wide receiver 3, so definitely.
Yes.
He is also ahead of Bijan Robinson. Who would you guys take, Bijan or Tyreek Hill?
Well, then it gets fun.
I have Bijan.
I think I'm going to be with Jamie on this one. I saw Jamie. I saw where he had him ranked, and then I took him, I think, at 5th overall in one of our recent mocks over these two, and I actually took him over Eckler in that. It's going to be hard to keep me off the Bijan Robinson train right now. I just see so many things that are pointing in the right direction there, most specifically how well Atlanta ran the ball last year. And when watching them on the game film, I mean, they do so many things from a schematic standpoint in the run game that are translatable to this year, and I don't think will fall off. I think they really run one of the best and most diverse run games. And Chris Lindstrom is one of the best blocking guards in the NFL. He's what Quentin Nelson was for Jonathan Taylor 2 years ago. I don't know if Quentin Nelson can still get back to that level. So I just feel like Bijan Robinson has more upside than both those players. As far as Robinson versus Hill, that one's a little closer for me just because I'm really high on Tyreek.
Yeah, looking at rookie running backs, Najee Harris was a top 4 running back in 2021. Jonathan Taylor was top 6 in 2020. And, he got going really late. Like his last 6 games, he was basically made his season. Saquon Barkley was top 2. Kareem Hunt and Alvin Kamara were top 4 back in 2017. Zeke was top 2 in 2016. Those were the best ones in recent memory. And last year, you didn't have any rookie running back finish in the top 5 or I don't know exactly where Ken Walker finished, but once Ken Walker became the starter, once Breece Hall got going, those guys were pretty damn good.
Yeah.
But their end of season numbers weren't, they weren't the week 1 starters. And then obviously Breece Hall got hurt. So yeah, anyway, the point is rookie running backs come in and they could be the number 1 running back. They could be the number 2 running back in fantasy. It's not a surprise.
Yeah. I want to amend something because we didn't get a chance to talk about this. So when we did the bold predictions and I said that Bijan would be number 1, the best rookie running back ever.
Yeah.
So, and I said Dickerson actually was non-PPR in 83. Saquon has the best rookie season ever in PPR.
Really?
In 2018. Yeah, I was surprised by that. But
I think he had like 94 catches. It was crazy.
He had 91 catches that season.
Yeah, Eli Manning was just checking down so often at that point.
Yeah, it was it was pretty phenomenal. So Bijan's got a lot of work to do. Dickerson in that season had 390 carries, which is a rookie record. That's an 83. And he ran for over 1,800 yards.
390.
And Barkley, obviously, in 2018, 91 catches. That's a lot, on top of 2,000 total yards. So for Bijan to get there, it's going to take a lot of work. But like you said, Adam, it doesn't necessarily have to be number 1 or number 2. He can still be top 5. And I think that's what you're hoping for if you're drafting him in the first round. Again, a lot of carries available. You can see in our magazine, that's our cover story is Bijan Robinson. And the tricky thing will be is how much will Arthur Smith just completely lean on him, because he does like, I spoke to Arthur Smith. He does like very much still Tyler Algier and still Cordarrelle Patterson. They're going to, differentiate how they use those 2 guys now because of Bijan, but it's going to be a lot of fun to see how this all gets chopped up.
Looking at their personnel, though, Jamie and Adam, I'm curious if they might be the outlier team that actually does use more pony package and 21 personnel, meaning 2 running backs on the field at the same time. Because if you look at that wide receiver group, it's like Do they have an edge if they have Algier and Bijan Robinson on the field? You have Robinson split out wide, have him come in motion pre-snap, or the opposite, Cordell Patterson out wide with Bijan Robinson in the backfield. But looking at their personnel, it feels like this is a team that could use that package more than any team, which would obviously benefit Bijan as well.
I think if they do that, it's probably with Patterson and one of the other two. Although, and we always get excited about this, which never materializes. You've seen a lot of mini camp footage of Bijan with the wide receiver group
lined up.
And, Steve Sarkisian said, it was in a Peter King article before the draft, that he thought, and the quote was Sarkisian. He said, I'll get it out. He said, I know I made a lot of my receivers mad, but he has the best hands of anybody on the team. And so he averaged 16.5 yards per reception. He had a significant amount of receptions during his career there. So he could be a 50 catch guy if they decide to do it. And if that happens on top of, let's say, 280 carries, it's going to be a pretty impressive season. If he gets somewhere close to 350 total touches, that's going to make him a monster.
And by the way, all the accolades Jamie just mentioned about Bijan as a receiver at Texas, it wasn't just him running flare routes and screens. He was running a really diverse route tree, including arrow routes, Texas routes, like things that you would see him lined up against linebacker and be like, that's McCaffrey-esque. And so just something else to keep note. This is not your typical great prospect. This is somebody who also has a receiving profile that's very diverse and different than even guys like Barkley and Taylor and Eckler, who kind of catch more like screens and flares.
Just to catch up on the Barkley versus Taylor poll on Twitter, 301 votes. Barkley's at 60%. Almost 61%. And on YouTube, Barkley's at 56% on 39 votes. A little surprised by that. I think I'm on Barkley too. I just a little uncertainty about the Anthony Richardson factor and what that will mean. It typically means fewer catches. And I know Daniel Jones is mobile, but it's just different. It's just different. And I don't have a ton of faith in Richardson to be that competent this year, I guess, as a quarterback. So that's kind of.
I think just the hope would be is that's what Shane Steichen does to make him comfortable, is a lot of short throws. Why I think a lot of people like Josh Downs, it's just a lot of easy routes, easy yards, and that's, if you have somebody that can do it. And I think Taylor is underrated in what he can do as a pass catcher. That's such an benefit to your offense if in fact they do employ it. So. It's a matter of Richardson being able to do it. It's a matter of, Steichen, allowing him to do it. And then, Taylor being, able to do it. And I will say one thing, just even though I said I was Taylor over Barkley, Taylor's still dealing with his ankle injury, and the fact that he's not ready yet, something to keep an eye on. If he's still limited in training camp, it's easy to go Barkley.
But at least he's signed. He does have that over Saquon Barkley. He's on a roster. So that actually, we talk about Taylor and we talk about Barkley, and I think it's kind of easy to poke holes in them. Obviously, we know how good they can be. They both have RB1 seasons. But why not just take Stefon Diggs or a CeeDee Lamb as the last guy in this round? But I think I can make an easier case for Diggs. He just was a lot better than CeeDee Lamb last year. And how about this? I mean, Diggs, before the Josh Allen injury, he was practically Justin Jefferson. It was 8 games, and he was on pace for 100. He was better. 128 catches, 1,821 yards, and 15 touchdowns on 176 targets before the Josh Allen elbow injury, basically including the game in which Allen got hurt, which was his second to last pass of the game against the Jets. So after that, like much, much worse. But I don't know. I mean, I gave you the Tyreek Hill stats with Tua, and Tyreek Hill in the consensus rankings is ahead of Jonathan Taylor and Saquon Barkley, but Stefon Diggs isn't. Dan, what do you make of that? Because I could make an easy case that Stefon Diggs should be going before basically any running back that you have a lot of questions about. I actually think Stefon Diggs is almost bust proof.
I don't hate this take at all, especially what
bust proof. I don't mean he doesn't have the ceiling that Jefferson does.
Mr. Kiss of Death over there.
No, I know where you're going with that, Jamie.
What's wrong for Diggs? I mean, unless Josh Allen doesn't.
He hasn't missed a free throw in his last 90, but I agree with you. The consistency factor for Diggs is definitely what stands out. I mean, that's now 3 seasons in a row where he's at least triple digit receptions, which is crazy. At least 8 touchdowns and over 1,200 yards. He was wide receiver 6 per game last season. 9 of 17 weeks, he was a top 10 receiver in PPR. There's a chance for squeaky wheel gets greased here, I think. Honestly, he's disgruntled about his role in the offense. One way to get him happier, give him more targets, feed him more. And he's still really good from an effective standpoint. You think he was third best in the NFL in yards per route run. Again, that's a stat I really like. Jake Gibbs done a good job explaining why it's been very predictable as far as if these receivers are still producing at a high level. So he's also, along with those receptions, had at least 154 targets. So the volume, this is the recipe for consistency in fantasy. Volume, a red zone role, can you still win as a route runner? The only thing I would say that would maybe go against Diggs is that he's going to be 30 years old this season. And obviously age is a factor at some point for wide receivers. We've seen some receivers do better in this range than kind of running backs as they get older in the 27, 28 range. But it's something to consider. But other than that, the consistency is there. So I'm kind of with you, Adam. I don't hate the idea of taking a swing on a Diggs instead of one of these running backs with the idea of you can lose your fantasy season in round one, but by swinging for the fences. But with a player like Diggs, a consistent player, maybe you're not losing. You're giving yourself a nice consistent option there in round one.
Yeah, I think the biggest argument for the running backs over Diggs is that you're probably going to like your round 2 wide receivers.
Yes,
your round 2 running backs. You somebody like Adams or Lamb could fall to you in round 2 if you're picking 9th or 10th in round 1, and then you don't want to take.
On that note, can I ask you guys this question, because you've both done them all with me from the mocks we've done, Jamie and Adam? Don't you guys kind of feel this year more than the previous years in that rounds? Let's get out of round 2. Let's say the rounds 3 through 5 range. There's more intriguing options at running back than there have been in recent years, and there's fewer intriguing options at receiver. That's how I've felt in every mock we've done. Have you guys had that feeling?
I think yes. Because we're seeing receivers get pushed up. It's not that hasn't necessarily been the case, but it feels like it's over exaggerated now. And so, it's like once you get past those, for me, I think, and I don't know if you guys agree, it's once you get past basically T. Higgins and Devontae Smith, which typically go in the beginning part of the third round. If you want to throw Chris Olave in there as well, I have no problem with that, but it's how much do you trust Keenan Allen at his age?
Right.
How much do you trust Calvin Ridley coming back from, a year and a half off? How much do you trust Christian Watson at this point? Where's DeAndre Hopkins playing? All these receivers that are in that group, Amari Cooper, so there's a lot of, okay, it's easy to pivot to, potentially Aaron Jones still there, Najee Harris still there, Joe Mixon, assuming his situation is status, J.K. Dobbins, all those guys that, are going to be there in round 3. Heath would say Miles Sanders, Dameon Pierce, these guys that are, some question marks, but again, you start to see still the potential upside. So yeah, I think it's not a bad move. And that's why we're going to see quarterbacks, if they're not drafted higher in most, non-analyst leagues, they're going to push those guys down, but it's easy to pivot to those guys, which is why we are in the industry, I think, which you've never seen before, not just taking maybe one quarterback, you're taking, as many as 4 to 6, or 4 to 5. I don't know if Herbert's getting pushed up that high yet, but with Lamar Jackson and Justin Fields joining, Joe Burrow as the second trio, it's going to be fascinating to see, how this all unfolds. But yeah, it's going to make the dead zone, I think, maybe either pushed up or pushed down, depending on if those running backs do go in round 3.
Yeah, I agree with the part about the wide receivers. I'm not sure I agree about the running backs being more interesting than they typically are in rounds 4. I don't know what rounds specifically we're talking about, but I do think the running backs right now are really interesting in like round 6 and later, where you could be getting DeAndre Swift. Instead of just guessing, I might as well just look at some, like I'm looking at NFC ADP. DeAndre Swift, Cam Akers, Miles Sanders going 65th. Dameon Pierce, Rashad White. These guys are really falling in drafts. James Conner, 77th overall. Isaiah Pacheco, 80th. Javonte Williams, David Montgomery in the 80s.
And a lot of those guys you mentioned have more guaranteed paths toward volume than a lot of these trendy receivers we're taking over them in that range, right? Like we're taking receivers who we need things to fall into place for them to get the target volume necessary for them to be anything more like as good as their talent suggested. Meanwhile, you mentioned Rashad White, like he's almost a lock for target. For volume.
Yeah. Also, I think remember last year was such a bad year for quarterback play, terrible year for wide receivers.
Yeah.
So the guys that were going rounds 3 through 5 last year, I wanted pretty much all of them. This year, I probably won't feel the same, but I also don't really feel all that comfortable talking about ADP right now. I just don't know what to make of it. I mean, on NFC, which is like high stakes leagues, but a lot of best ball, Derrick Henry and Josh Jacobs are 3rd round picks, and Tony Pollard is 23rd. I don't know that I can tell you that if you take, Jefferson and Chase with your first 2 picks, that you're going to be able to go Jefferson, Pollard, Henry, or Jefferson, Jacobs, Henry. I don't think I can give you that advice right now. So
that'd be pretty cool though.
Yeah. All right, Jamie, tell me about CeeDee Lamb. You have him 13th, but he's 12th in the consensus rankings. Do you think he deserves to be a pick on the swing? And obviously that's ahead of Devontae Adams, ahead of Henry and Chubb and et cetera. CeeDee Lamb, we'll end with him.
I think he's going to be a little polarizing just from the standpoint of as more people start to draft and you start to look at some of the comments that came out of, Mike McCarthy's mouth earlier this offseason about how he wants to run the ball more, that's going to scare some people, and I get it. And then you see the addition of Brandon Cooks and maybe the positive reports about Michael Gallup, and you say, okay, are the targets still going to be there for him? And I get that as well. But I think what we've seen from him, everything sets up for him to be a superstar. Will he ever get to Justin Jefferson heights? Probably not. But can he be in that next tier? I think so. And he sort of proved that last year, So he is an alpha. He is, somebody that's worth taking in the end of the first round. I don't buy what Mike McCarthy said because I was there the day afterwards when he tried to, sort of backtrack off of it and said privately and publicly that what the we're going to run the ball more and sort of taking a shot at Kellen Moore about lighting up the scoreboard. I think he sort of meant that we're just not going to be run as many plays and be as up tempo in offense, but they're still going to throw the ball quite a bit. And so Brandon Cooks at 31 and Michael Gallup, who's been good, but never really somebody that's, dominated targets, and their tight end situation, I think, getting worse. And maybe even their running back situation getting worse, as much as we love Tony Pollard, but, the group as a whole is not exactly the best group. So I think CeeDee Lamb's target should still be, in the top 10, maybe not the top 5 anymore, but still in the top 10. I still love his potential. I still think he's got the chance to be a top 5 wide receiver. And so everything to me still screams, take him at the back end of the first round or early part of the second round.
Okay. And yeah, I mean, I'll give you just some numbers real quick. He played 12 games with Dak Prescott. Lamb was on pace for 108 catches, 1,387 yards, and 10 touchdowns on only 152 targets. And with Cooper Rush, he was on pace for 167 targets, so 15 more targets. This is 5 games, 3 fewer catches, and almost 100 fewer yards, and 3 fewer touchdowns. So his overall numbers not as good as what his pace was with just Dak Prescott in the 12 games that Prescott played. The Cooper Rush dragged CeeDee Lamb down a little bit, but his numbers were not nearly as good as the other wide receivers who were going in the first round. Just his 17-game pace or the per-game numbers: Jefferson, Chase, Kupp, Tyreek Hill, and Stefon Diggs. And Dallas was of those teams. Well, actually, not the Rams, but. Yeah, actually, that's interesting. So that's 6 wide receivers in the first round. Dallas had the second fewest pass attempts. The Rams had the fewest, Dallas, and then the other teams were more pass heavy. Well, let's read some emails to finish off our show. This is something that I do to Heath that he doesn't like, that I'm going to do to you guys now. I'm going to read emails.
Why does he not like it?
Well, because I didn't put the emails in the notes, and I didn't think we'd have time for them. So I'm going to do that now. Did you say I never do that?
No,
I almost always do that. Actually,
you did.
All right, so let's just pick some at random here. How about a grade the trade? All right, I took over a terrible dynasty team this offseason. Never finished higher than 11th place. I made a couple of trades in 3 years. I made a couple of trades, and I'd love to get your input. It's a 1 QB league, 12 teams, half PPR. I traded pick 102. Rashad White, and I do not like this trade, I don't think. All right, 102, Rashad White, and a 2024 second round pick for 111, Cam Akers, Najee Harris, and a 2024 first round pick, which will likely be a mid-round pick. And it's not terrible, I guess, but
it's not terrible. It's not ideal either. First of all, your second round pick that you traded is likely to be 201, 202. You finished 11th in 3 straight years. I guess you're acquiring Najee, so it's kind of playing for now. But it's I mean, in a 1 QB league, that 102 is a little less valuable after Bijan Robinson, I would say. I mean, what are you going to take Gibbs? What are you going to take JSN? Like you could take Anthony Richardson, I guess, but it depends on your QB situation. So I don't hate that side of it, but I just don't have too much faith in what you got back. I mean, Cam Akers to me maybe has a year left of fantasy relevance, maybe less. I'm not a big believer in his talent. So you're banking on Najee Harris here. Also, that contract's running out in Pittsburgh. I don't know if they'll resign him. They didn't resign Connor when his contract ran out. So just seems like some risky assets you're getting back at a position I don't like to invest in here. And you're giving up picks as a team that's rebuilding. So that's, or draft capital, I should say. So that's never a great thing.
So you're giving up Rachaad White and 102 to get
a second round pick
and a second round next year.
And a second round next year to get Cam Akers, Najee Harris.
111 and a late first next year.
Not necessarily
mid to late first.
Yeah, I hate this.
All right, Jamie, help John out with a keeper. It is PPR and a 1 QB league, and he needs to keep Justin Fields, Dalvin Cook, Breece Hall, or DeAndre Hopkins.
No round penalty?
No. Fields, Dalvin Cook, Breece Hall, and DeAndre Hopkins.
I would keep Breece Hall, just with the hope that he turns into what he was before he got hurt.
Okay. And how about a Superflex question? 10-team Superflex. Oh, first he says, this is from Conrad. He says, Dear Matt, Sean, Bobby, Daryl, and Jeremy. Matt, Sean,
no
Bobby,
clue.
Feels like Seahawks.
Daryl.
Yeah, I have no idea. I'm in a 10-team super flex. We originally were 8 teams, and quarterbacks would fall a bit more, but because of higher replacement levels left. Last year, that habit stuck with 1 QB in the first round with a large run starting end of the second through the third round. My question is, I'm a big believer this year on the Fields, Lamar, Herbert, Lawrence range of quarterback. But should I just take the top quarterback if that's there late in the first, or the second quarterback in the second round for value? Or just wait for the top 3 to go and then go for my target quarterbacks?
I think you should. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Adam.
That was a little like wordy there. But
it was confusing, but I think the takeaway for me is what you saw last year in your league, the trend of quarterbacks being moved up so much is only going to increase this year. And it's going to get greater as people understood and saw the difference of how much quarterbacks matter in a Superflex 10-team league. So I would take one with your first round pick. I would probably consider taking one personally with your second round pick. I think if you wait till it comes all the way back to you at the end of the third round, you might be past your Lawrence tier. You might be getting nothing out of that. And so it's too big of a risk for me.
I'm definitely taking quarterback. And like Dan said, you might consider 2. We had a startup Superflex Dynasty mock draft on yesterday's show. And so it's not obviously apples to apples, but, still it's a Superflex draft. And we had the first 6 picks, I believe, were quarterbacks, if I'm not mistaken, Dan. And 8 went in the first round?
Yep.
So that just goes to show you how much you should be prioritizing that position. And you're still going to get great players in round 2 if you don't want to take, back-to-back quarterbacks, and even, rounds 3 through 5 will still be great players because all those quarterbacks will get pushed up.
I think I don't love the strategy of taking a quarterback with my first 2 picks in a 12-team Superflex. I feel like a little more open to it in 10-team. I don't know how you guys feel about that. Because obviously you can do better at your
I'm even more concerned in a 12-team.
Well, but in a 12-team league, you're going to have a harder time filling out running back, wide receiver, and tight end. In a 10-team,
personally not worried about it. In a 12-team league, quarterback, if there's no rule, especially on how many quarterbacks you can roster, it is desperation time in a 12-team league at quarterback.
I'm not saying you take one in the 10th round. I'm just saying I don't want my first 2 picks necessarily.
Well, I think it matters where you pick. Like we saw in the draft yesterday. Again, it's not really comparable, but Jacob Gibbs, for example, passed on a quarterback with his first 2 picks, and he took CeeDee Lamb and Bijan Robinson. So just to give you an example of the caliber of players that fell to him after 8 quarterbacks were off the board. Again, Dynasty League being what it is. But when he came back in rounds 3 and 4, he also passed on quarterbacks, right? Did he do that? Right? Or did he take one there?
He did. He did a back-to-back of Pickett and
no, but he took CJ Stroud. That's what he did. He took CJ Stroud. That's what he was looking at in round 3.
Yeah,
his first quarterback.
Now, he took CJ Stroud, though, because it was Dynasty, right?
Sure.
Okay, he took quarterback in round 3.
But what was left
like
there
20th quarterback.
Yeah.
But could he have
exactly.
taken like a Russell Wilson or?
Yeah, maybe you can go Russell
Yes,
Wilson.
but again,
there,
so you're
sure.
talking 16th quarterback, 15th.
Yeah.
You know, you're not getting top tier guys. So to your point, Adam, yes, could you have taken one quarterback? You could have had Deshaun Watson there or Anthony Richardson. Those two guys were available at the end of the first round. Had he not taken a second quarterback back-to-back picks, he's looking at that pairing.
Right.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. Tomorrow, 13 through 24 in the PPR consensus rankings with Heath and Chris. Friday, Heath and Dan for some Fantasy Jeopardy and backfield battles. And Saturday, if you haven't seen it on YouTube already, you will hear the Beyond the Box Score episode that we did yesterday with JJ Zachariason and Ben Gretsch and Jacob Gibbs. It was awesome. All right. Until tomorrow. Thanks so much for that amazing donation. Stay tuned for more ways to donate to St. Jude and play some fantasy football with us. We'll talk to you later.